Thank you both. I guess I'll start. I'm sure people are a bit emotional, but I will start by asking you, maybe Charlotte, to elaborate a bit on what you said in the introduction, that this is a fiction, but it's a personal fiction. Yeah, I'm curious about the process of deciding to work with personal material, and also the process of creating a fiction from it.
Yeah, I was thinking the other day about when this process really started, and I realized it was after I made my first film and before I made the 2 shorts that came after. And that first film was definitely within the world of this one, like a slightly different take on a similar feeling. And when I first conceived of the idea of this as a feature without really drawing that line for myself, it was, wouldn't it be fun to tell a story about a young father and his daughter on holiday? It's a relationship I knew, it was a setting I knew, lots of details that felt intriguing to capture and portray. So inspired by my own relationship and memories, I began to work on this quite conventionally fictional film. And over the course of making it or writing it, drew on memories from childhood, memories from holidays, anecdotes, details, and eventually that process found its way into the script itself. I couldn't really separate it at a certain point, which is when the rave kind of emerged on the page. It wasn't in the outline, I don't think. I think it just kind of, it was coming from some reckoning with the process, and it became more personal. It became more of an expression of something for me. And then it became more fictional again once I cast people and found settings. And this wasn't one holiday. I wasn't on this holiday. These things didn't happen, but the emotion of it is very much mine.
Yeah. So I'm curious about that idea of making this explicitly a memory piece. I think that accounts for a lot of the power of the film.
Yeah.
So that was initially, you said it was a more conventional film, so it was just the vacation that was. Yeah,
right in the beginning. I mean, by the time I actually wrote the script, the memory framing was there. Right. The rave was there, and the scene 2/3, if not 3/4 of the way through, where you see a very short glimpse of adult Sophie's present day life was always there. And then we kind of, as the script evolved and we developed it, we found this ending. And in the edit, we found the opening. That wasn't the opening of the script. It's one of the few quite major changes. It felt major to me. But yeah, I think it became about memory. It could no longer, even though there were times it felt very tempting to revert back to that very straightforward holiday, when I was never sure if it would work. It was impossible because I didn't know how that film ended, because it had become so inextricably about memory.
Can you talk a little bit then about the process of casting, and maybe start with Frankie?
Yeah, I'd love to. Frankie, so we started about 6 months before we shot. I worked with Lucy Pardy, who's an amazing casting casting director, who is known for making discoveries and amazing at working with finding kids. And we just put the word out through every possible means during the height of COVID, through sports clubs, though they weren't really in session, through schools, through the power of WhatsApp mum groups. And we received submissions from almost 800 kids, which is a weird thing to say in front of Frankie now. And we had them do little video introductions and send photographs and do exercises, play outside, tell us a story. And eventually we met 16 in Glasgow in February of last year, and one of them was Frankie. And Frankie blew us away in person. Was just so... I've never told this story next to you. Was just so... really surprised us at your ability to really perform as someone that wasn't you. Like, I expected to find a kid who was as close to the character as possible, or I would write for that kid to be the character. And in Frankie, we found someone who could really move between different states and emotions and then not carry it out of the room. Like, you got very sad in that first session as part of the exercise, and then you were like up and out. We were all very disarmed. I think you've been thinking about your guinea pig. Was it a guinea pig? Yeah, it was an amazing process, and I learned a lot. And it could never have been anyone else, and that was clear when we met Frankie. And then Paul, we kind of came to Calum after we were pretty sure who Sophie was, and I met Paul. His name had come up much earlier in the casting process, but he was unavailable. He was shooting God's Creatures, and our dates moved, and we met and we spoke, and we had a really sincere and thoughtful conversation. He was so passionate about the project. I was very suspicious because he said all the right things, and like definitely asked if he had been like set up by his agent to say all the right things, and he wasn't. He just was very sincere, really cared about the project, had read it more than I had read it at that point, certainly recently. And yeah, it was clear he really wanted to work hard to make it happen, and he wants to be good. He's really interested in being good and putting in the work that is required to do that.
Frankie, do you want to tell us about auditioning and working with Paul?
Yeah. Oh, okay. So, what do you want me to talk about first?
Maybe the audition first.
Okay. So
it's your first Q&A, you were just saying backstage, so.
Yeah. Auditioning. Right. Okay, right. So auditioning, it kind of started as like something I would love to do, but definitely didn't think that I like had a chance to actually do it. But as it got closer and closer, we done a lot of different, different stuff. Like Charlie said, sending in the photos and videos and stuff like that. It got closer again, and then we got to do an audition in Glasgow, and that was crazy. I remember asking the guy who was doing my COVID test if he knew anything about how many people was left, like how much chance I had. And then, yeah, I think it was the next day, we went back again, and after that, just like about a week or something after that, my mum got a call from Lucy, who was the casting director, saying that I had the parts. That was so crazy and exciting. Yeah.
Do you remember what you did in that moment? Like, do you remember the moment that you got that call?
I was so happy, but I wasn't crying, but like not in a sad way. I wasn't sad, but I was like extremely happy.
Maybe Charlotte, you can tell us a bit about working with the actors. It really is so much about the two of them, and it's actually, it's not just about words. So much of it is about gesture and the physicality of the actors around each other, and also how they're shot and framed. And so I wonder how much of that was already in the script, or how much of that was worked out on set.
Yeah, both. Like the script was written quite visually. And then Greg, the cinematographer, and I really worked extensively before we got to Turkey to talk through how we would shoot the film and how we would shoot each different point of view incorporated in the film underneath the overarching point of view of adult Sophie. And then the relationship building was everything, we had to portray a convincing sense of familial intimacy, and these guys had to know and like each other, which fortunately they did. And we had 2 weeks before we started shooting, and I could only really spend like an hour and a half with you guys in the morning because I had tech scouts, and so Paul and Frankie would just hang out all day, go to the beach, learn to play pool. Pool featured quite heavily in the film, the game of pool, and we arrived, and we played pool, and I was like, oh, Frankie has never played pool before. So we spent a lot of time around that pool table, and we worked, though. Like, we had a version of the script that just had Frankie's scenes in it, and we read it all together. You never had a copy of the script outside of that. And we read it through twice, and we'd worked through scenes, and we'd done a lot of the big dialogue scenes during the audition. There aren't too many, as I'm sure you noticed. And you just remembered them. It was amazing. Like, carried it forward. We didn't ever work on memorizing lines. You just kind of absorbed it. And so we'd read through things before we started shooting. And I'm curious what you thought of what was happening with Calum, the character of Calum, because like, you were aware that the script didn't have everything in it, right? Did you have any idea? Did you think about what that was at all? I feel like over the course of shooting, you started to get a sense that you weren't totally clued into everything, because we tried to kind of somewhat protect Frankie from the character of Calum's kind of individual struggle, partly because I think that helped Paul. You know, the process all fed into it. What was your take on that?
I mean, I knew it was like depressing, but I hadn't really caught on like completely what was happening. Like when they were filming like scenes that was just Paul, I could tell that it was like obviously wasn't happy scenes, but I didn't really know exactly what was happening until I watched the film at Cannes, and then I kind of realised what was happening.
I think we have time for a couple of audience questions. Should we take one from the third row? Just.
How was it? Are you okay? It was in reference to some of the DV footage, now I can say.
We'll take one from. Oh, we do have one from the third row, actually. Yes. Okay.
I mean, I'm curious what shots you're thinking of, but my guess is the shots you're thinking of were mostly found. But found not accidentally, found because we were clear about what we needed and wanted. And it's always a case of if something doesn't feel right, adjusting and making it work. Like the sequence of him practicing Tai Chi in the bedroom where you see just the shadows of his arms at first and then his arms come into frame was a completely different shot, and it just didn't work. It looked a little silly, and Greg had the wherewithal to stop what we were doing and say, this isn't working, let's find something that does. And we had spoken so extensively about how to shoot this film and references, and know that we share a very similar taste, although our instincts are quite different, that we were able to find that, and it was right. The same with the scene where he's kind of putting Sophie to bed before it cuts into Rave, the tender sequence. Like, it just didn't feel right, and we had to stop and take a breath, which was hard because Frankie's hours were so constrained. There was always this pressure toward the end of the day. But we had worked together before and had enough of a sense of what we needed out of the images to find it, and we'd set ourselves up to have the space to do that. Greg also just has an eye for detail and bodies and gestures, and a lot of that's his eye too.
Could you say a bit about some of those references?
I can. I don't know. I mean, like, early in developing this, like the references were very superficial. It was kind of like story and relationship references, you know, like Alice in the Cities or Tomboy or Somewhere or Corpus Celeste, and then they became more stylistic, you know, like Greg started watching a lot of Taiwanese New Wave. We started watching like Simon Liang, and I fell in love with Chantal Ackerman, who inspired that 360-degree shot at the end. Claire Denis, Kelly Reichardt, there was like a shameless sequence that ripped off a scene from Old Joy that didn't make the final cut, which I'm grateful for to say, because you really shouldn't be ripping off masters in any way, shape, or form. But definitely like inspired by all of these people, and everybody's eye is different, and I find it fun to kind of take in shots and images and they find their way in the script, and then they're so transformed by the time they're on screen. But Terrence Davis is another one. Joanna Hogg has also got a film here. Everyone's here. Yeah, and Greg and Blair, the editor, that we all went to film school together, and they're huge informers of my taste, and we share films, and we saw a lot of docs toward the end as we started to shoot, like short docs. There's a film called Silence is a Falling Body, which is a lot of DV footage that felt uncannily similar to what we were doing, and yeah.
All right, we can take one more, and I cannot barely see, but yeah, yeah, right there. I don't think we want to do why questions, do we?
No, I mean, I think those moments are building toward the emotion that arises in the final sequence. And I think there are whys and answers to whys, but I think it's about perceiving those scenes and taking them in and allowing them to juxtapose to the images they do, and allowing it all to accumulate to the end.
But maybe one way to talk about this is, I'm curious about this, the way you describe the film as, transforming from something more conventional as a narrative to what we see on screen. And was there a process of subtraction, would you say? I mean, because I feel like what's on the screen relies so much on withholding and, opacity in a way, and what we can't see and what we will never know.
There was a process of subtraction from the first draft of the script. It's always a fine line between giving yourself enough, like what is the minimum in some ways, but having more than you need, just a little more than you need to shoot with. But I'm also very determined not to shoot what I don't want in the film. So we didn't shoot anything that offered the type of clarity that some people might have been more inclined toward, because we didn't want to have to use it. But there was a lot of subtraction, and I think like in an earlier draft of even this film, which always had the memory framing, there was a draft in which the tension arose more from their relationship, that it built toward a kind of bigger fallout, and there's a moment of that, but it's a moment that comes and goes, and I think it felt important. It was a big realization I had before the final draft to take all that tension out, because the notes I got were often like more tension, more tension, more tension, like rack up the tension wherever you can, and I realized that I wanted that to be coming from their own individual experiences, but that their time together was joyous, and filled with love, and then the tension had to be derived from elsewhere, and at times this question of what's going on with Calum.
I'm getting the sign that we have to wrap up, but I want to mention that Charlotte's actually doing a talk with Mia Hansen-Love at 4 o'clock. Highly recommend that. Thank you, Frankie, for being with us as well. And thank you both for this film.